Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. One of football's worst-kept secrets could soon be resolved as Real Madrid look to close a deal to sign Liverpool's Trent Alexander-Arnold. So how did it get to this? The Reds losing a homegrown asset in the prime of his career on a free transfer. And where will he fit amongst the stellar lineups of stars at the Bernabeu? With us, we have the Athletics football correspondent David Ornstein, who broke the news of Real Madrid looking to seal the deal for Trent Alexander-Arnold, our Liverpool correspondent James Pearce, and also our newsletter lead writer Phil Hay as well. David, Monday you were picking up 2 awards at the sports journalism celebrations, and then Tuesday you're breaking the news of Trent Alexander-Arnold. Man, you need to start celebrating yourself. Let the work go for a minute, but talk to us. This is quite a monumental deal if it goes ahead.
Yeah, there's no rest for the wicked, and certainly no time to celebrate when you're in the football industry, and the show rolls on.
It does.
I mean, you described this, Ayo, as the best kept secret, and therefore it's important to start by saying we felt this has been coming for quite some time. There's been a consensus around the industry for months, really, that Trent Alexander-Arnold is quite possibly on his way to Real Madrid. So I don't think it's a massive shock what's been reported, to be honest. And we know in January, Real Madrid made an offer to Liverpool to sign him. That's their desire to bring him in. They didn't even want to wait to try and get him as a free agent. They were ready to pay a transfer fee. And that's not the fault of Liverpool, of Trent Alexander-Arnold. It's just how the market works. So naturally, with no news on a new contract, which Liverpool, made efforts to secure him to, then this point that we've reached now was always very possible. And yeah, we reported on The Athletic that Real Madrid are working to close a deal for Trent Alexander-Arnold. It's understood that they'll have to inform Liverpool if and when something is signed, and that hasn't happened so far. But clearly they're confident, and they've been, monitoring him for 2 years. They've been actively pursuing his signature since January, when they've been legally permitted to. And we have no final conclusion, resolution, news, nothing official just yet. But I think for the first time, we've felt that the direction of travel now appears to be concrete. And, it's massive for Trent Alexander-Arnold, for Liverpool, for Real Madrid, for the football transfer market. There's been a lot of emotional reaction to this. Many people understanding it, others, certainly sections of the Liverpool fan base, in particular on social media, sort of very angry and upset and hurt by it. And I guess that's all part and parcel of this, and we'll discuss a lot more of it. But for the industry, it's potentially really big news, and it has loads of different ramifications as well. And let's see how now these final days and weeks go of the season, of course, but also in terms of Real Madrid trying to get this proposed deal over the line.
Yeah, James, Liverpool are in pole position really to take the Premier League this season. But, you look at the exits from the Cups, you look at the exits from the Champions League. This is yet another bit of news for Liverpool that the press are sort of circulating around. But, I would say, does this come as a blow? But in reality, I don't know. From my standpoint, I almost felt there was an air of inevitability about where we are right now with the Trent situation.
Yeah. I certainly don't think this would have come as a big shock to Michael Edwards or Richard Hughes. I think, as David said, it's been pretty clear the way this one was heading. You go back to January when Real Madrid made that attempt to buy Trent, when of course their need was great, having lost Carvajal to a serious knee injury. Things like that don't happen unless there's been some encouragement. And I think just the lack of positive noises, in contrast to, you look at Van Dijk and Salah, and they've both been open about the fact that, they would love to be able to stay. If the right agreement can be put in place, we haven't heard that from Alexander-Arnold, have we? So, he's kept his counsel pretty much throughout this saga. He hasn't stopped in a mix zone to speak to us reporters since September. So yeah, I think there is there's certainly been an inevitability about this. And then, I think obviously there's been lots of reports in Spain that it's absolutely done and dusted. We understand that's not quite the case. There's still a little bit of work to be done, but I don't think anyone expects this to end up anywhere else apart from Trent Alexander-Arnold playing at the Bernabeu next season.
Yeah, Phil. I mean, this was going to make the newsletter for sure. I mean, what were your thoughts when you heard about the emergence that Trent Alexander-Arnold could possibly, I know you say it like that because it hasn't actually happened, but could be possibly heading to Real Madrid?
Not surprised in the slightest, exactly as James has just outlined. I think struck for the first time how solid the news seemed to be, and actually it felt like finally we were cutting to the chase on this. But it feels like the water's been flowing in that direction for a good while now, and I always felt that the three who were out of contract this summer, Alexander-Arnold was the one who was definitely going. He's 26. He's not a player who any club should be losing for nothing. And if Liverpool were going to sort him out and tie him down, if there was going to be an agreement, it would have got moving properly by now. I understand and get that they have to be a bit more circumspect with Van Dijk and Salah because of their age. If you look around football these days, clubs just don't commit to big contracts to players beyond the age of 30 or not in anything other than very rare circumstances. But losing Trent has no real upside. I've known Ornstein for a long time now, and his transfer stories are always about the facts. But at the same time, when you read them, you tend to get a sense from the writing of how he's reading the runes. And when I saw him say Real Madrid looking to close out a deal for Alexander-Arnold, that made me think straight away, this is on. If not signed and sealed, then it's getting very, very close. And I see the appeal. It's the Bernabeu for one thing, and over the years, the world's best at being seduced by that stadium and that club. There's definitely something about being at Real or Barcelona that seems to supersede an awful lot of other teams elsewhere in Europe and in the world. It's going to be very lucrative for him. It's like signing on fee heaven and being out of contract. And financially, it's a bit of a dream for Real as well, not having to pay a fee. So, like I said, not surprised at all.
Yeah, David, and we know Real Madrid have been sniffing around Trent Alexander-Arnold for a while, but, from your perspective, how long has this been in the pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I just want to finish up on with Trent Alexander-Arnold is that, there are many different elements to this. You've got Liverpool who could have addressed the situation sooner. Now, none of us know exactly what has gone on behind the scenes here, and it puts us in a very difficult position to judge the rights and the wrongs, the ins and the outs, and many people are doing that, especially on social media, without knowing events behind the scenes, myself included. But Liverpool did have a lot of time in which they could have tried to address it, but there were changes in sporting director from Michael Edwards to Julian Ward to Jörg Schmadtke and then to Richard Hughes. And so this was an inherited problem, same as Van Dijk and Salah, for the current regime. That's not to say it isn't on their watch, and they had the opportunity to get there with all three or make some progress and do the best they could. There was an offer to Trent Alexander-Arnold, and only he and Liverpool will know what went on in those conversations, if it was suitable, if it was not, if it was too late, if the allure of Real Madrid was just too much. So there's the Liverpool part. There's the Trent Alexander-Arnold part with a lot of people, presiding over it on X in particular, without any idea of what would have been going through his mind, his dialogue, or his representative's dialogue with Liverpool. I'm not placing blame and I'm not absolving. I'm just saying, we should show a bit of respect. Some of the reaction that he has faced as a footballer, a player who has come through at Liverpool, and you could say has shown loyalty by staying with them throughout his career to date. He's a brilliant talent, which is why we're all talking about him and why there's a lot of hurt in this as well. Of course, Liverpool fans would have loved to have seen him stay for the rest of his career, and they've picked up on some comments from the past that many footballers make, talking about their affinity with a particular club. There's been a lot of criticism for him as well from certain quarters of fan bases and the media about his perceived defensive weaknesses, and a lot of people who are now sort of saying, "How dare you leave?" We're also saying at times in the past, "I'm not sure how good he is." So you can't sort of have it both ways. And then you've got the Real Madrid part of this as well, because there are very few players who Real Madrid come for that turn their head away and say, "No, I don't want to join you." And you can look at Liverpool's setup now, which is really exciting. They're challenging for all the major honours. They look set to do so into the future. And people are understandably saying, well, you could have fulfilled all your ambitions at Liverpool and become the captain. But it is allowed that you want to try different things in your career. When you bear in mind the circumstances of what's been going on with the contracts as well, and you say, look, it's a chance for me to experience a different club, arguably the best on the planet, certainly the most successful in Europe, a new stadium, a new country, a new language, a new culture. I don't understand why that's not okay. So then people listening to this might say, oh, well, it's the way he's gone about it, and he strung Liverpool along, and he didn't communicate. But he didn't communicate in either direction. He didn't say, I'm going to be signing this. He didn't say, I'm not going to be signing this, and I'm going to be leaving. He said early on, this isn't going to be played out through the media. And in the end, what has emerged is reports in Spain and around Europe, essentially, which some of us in the UK have followed up on. We've still not heard anything from him. We've still not heard anything from Liverpool or Real Madrid. And I kind of think perhaps they were in a no-win situation. And I don't know, just a bit of calm and restraint is probably healthy on all sides here.
Okay, brilliant. Sounds like they've got a lot of work to do, James. There's a lot going on here in the background. I mean, I know Richard Hughes has got a bit of flack, but is it fair? I mean, a lot of this sounds relatively inherited, as David has pointed out earlier.
Yeah, I think you have to view how Trent has got to this point in the context of the upheaval behind the scenes in the last few years. As David said, Julian Ward left in the summer of 2023. After only a year as sporting director, and Jörg Schmadtke said himself when he came in as interim sporting director, he basically said, I'm here as a facilitator for transfers to do what Jurgen Klopp asked me to do, which meant he wasn't sporting director in the true sense of the word. So, and then it was almost a perfect storm, because around that time FSG are looking for fresh investment. Mike Gordon, who was responsible for the day-to-day running of the club, was looking to take a step back from his commitments. And then, of course, November 23, Klopp tells the owners he intends to leave at the end of the season. That's kept a pretty closely guarded secret until the back end of January. And of course, for the rest of the season, everything was on ice until the new sporting director, Richard Hughes, and the new head coach, Arne Slot, were in place. So, yeah, that was kind of how it reached this point. And I think it's also important to kind of say, well, there are no guarantees that if Liverpool had put a contract under his nose quicker that he would have signed. We don't, that's one of the things we don't know at the moment. We don't know how many offers he's had. We don't know how lucrative those offers have been. Because I think one of the interesting thing that jumps out from the reports in Spain has been saying this has been very much a long-term project from Real Madrid, 2 years in the making. And that, if it's true what sources in Spain are saying, that Real Madrid made it very clear from the off that they only wanted him on a free transfer. So, that kind of also negates this idea of why didn't Liverpool just sell him, last summer? Because, of course, a player would have to agree to that, and there's no guarantees that Real Madrid would have been willing buyers at that time. And I think even now you look back and think there's no doubt Liverpool did the right thing in January, not taking 15, 20 million or whatever was on the table, because that kind of fee is just small change in relation to the value of winning the Premier League title.
All right, David, thanks so much for your time. I'm sure you've got lots more to be working on. You're always spinning plates. Appreciate it, sir.
Pleasure. See you soon, guys.
Okay, joining us now from Madrid, we have our Real Madrid writer, Guillermo Ray. Guillermo, look, after 2 years, Real Madrid have been chasing Trent Alexander-Arnold. Looks like they potentially might get him this summer. The question is, do they actually need him?
Hello, Ayo. I think definitely. This season has been a nightmare for Carlo Ancelotti with the Dani Carvajal's injury. He torn his ACL. It hasn't been easy for the coaching staff. They have managed to keep winning and surviving with Fede Valverde as emergency right back, Lucas Vázquez, who could be considered as like the natural right back, has had also some injuries, some disconformed, and is a position who really needs a reinforcement. The coaching staff asked for this reinforcement in the transfer winter transfer window, and in the summer it seems like it will be good news for Real Madrid if they bring definitely Alexander-Arnold.
Yeah, it's very rare that Florentino Perez doesn't get what he wants, let's face it. So it'll be really interesting to see how this all plays out. James, I was listening to the Walk On podcast, and you guys were talking about Trent Alexander-Arnold's legacy at Liverpool, leaving at the age of 26. I mean, it's fair to say he's achieved a lot with his boyhood club. What do you think his legacy will be if he does end up going to Real Madrid? Will he get his statue? I know he's got a mural, but will he get his statue?
No, I think we can rule out the statue. I think it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, legacy is so subjective, isn't it? And I think, I've got friends who are season ticket holders who are pretty much divided down the middle about this. I think, I've had lots of messages saying, I can't believe that he would walk away. What about, the comments about wanting to be Liverpool captain one day, about being a one club man, and others saying, well, good luck to him. He's 26. He's given us 20 years of his life. Joined the academy at the age of 6. He's won the lot. Played nearly 350 games. It's been so influential. I'm wishing him all the best. So there is a real divide. Personally, in terms of his legacy.
Given that, James, I'm just going to ask, given that conflict of opinion, then how do you think the crowd are going to deal with him?
Good question, Phil.
Well, I think, for a start, I wouldn't envisage any hostility towards him inside Anfield. I think, as we know, social media is a whole different world to the real world, and I think those who see it as just, it's life, players come and go, new heroes will emerge, c'est la vie, they will be positive towards him, and he'll get a decent enough send-off. I think those who feel differently will probably just keep their counsel and stay quiet, and it'll be more apathy than any hostility. I think what is clear is that if, as expected, he does join Real Madrid, then he will know this as much as anyone. He gives up that kind of, any hope he maybe once had of being remembered in the same bracket as Steven Gerrard or Jamie Carragher, because the reason they are so adored by Liverpool fans everywhere is not just what they won, but it's the loyalty and the longevity that they gave to the club in the city they grew up in. So, that's the choice that Trent Alexander-Arnold had to make. It's the same choice as Steve McManaman had to make when, at the turn of the century, before he went to the Bernabeu. And I think certainly the people I've spoken to, Liverpool fans, are pretty divided on this.
Yeah, I mean, Phil, this is also really interesting for me in terms of how we deem footballers, especially local footballers as well, and what they deserve to do or what they should do if they've grown up at their boyhood club and ended up playing professional. But, I mean, everyone reserves the right to also just follow their dreams. He's done a lot at Liverpool.
Yeah, they do. I mean, the concept of loyalty is pretty partisan in football, and I think having your cake and eating it is often the nature of football fandom, which is to say that people, and probably no different, expect players to be ultra loyal when they're at your club, but equally, when your club are looking to sign players from elsewhere, have no kind of scruples about those players doing so up in sticks, no questions asked. Put it this way, nobody complains about loyalties when the transfers are incoming. It just never happens. The friction here is definitely, in part anyway, but I think to a large degree, because of the nature of his impending exit, the fact that it's on a free transfer, so there's no fee, there's no transfer cash recouped for him, which would help Liverpool massively. And in the circumstances, it doesn't help Liverpool at all. I get why that rankles. And he does have the added complication of being a Liverpool boy, academy player. That definitely clouds these matters further. I just think in reference to somebody like Gerrard, there has been a bit said this week about that summer where it looked like he was going to go to Chelsea and seemed to be asking to go to Chelsea. So these things aren't black and white either way. But in fairness to Alexander-Arnold, I think you have to make the point, and we have already on this podcast, but that Liverpool's contractual management, if it hasn't been terrible, it hasn't been ideal. They've got 3 of the top players all out of contract in the same summer, and it would be pretty ridiculous to try and suggest that they've done that by design. So for sure, Trent Alexander-Arnold is looking after himself, and Real Madrid's a stonking move for him. There's no doubt about that. I do get why he wants to take it, and he has to front up what comes in return. But there are questions for Liverpool to answer too, and I think one of the things that we might never know, and I think James and Arnie would have more insight into this than I do, is just how far Liverpool have gone in trying to keep him. That does seem pretty crucial in all this.
Yeah, for sure. James, I'm going to come to that in a bit, but Guillermo, I'm just thinking about Trent Alexander-Arnold coming to join, I guess, a new type of Galactico. Is he going to be yet another player that is there? Because I see the commercial value for Real Madrid, but also do Real Madrid fans feel excited about the potential of Trent Alexander-Arnold coming to their club?
Well, I think it has been considered as a market opportunity, right? When we mention some players who were targeted by Real Madrid, for example, Lenny Yoro, or for example, Jude Bellingham, we call them, or within the club, they said that they were generational talents. But here we are talking about a player who is probably in the peak of his career. James, I'm sure that he knows better, but probably is in the peak of his career, and he will end up at Real Madrid for free. So it's considered a success, even that is not considered like a generational talent as such. And given the last missteps from Real Madrid, Lenny Yoro himself, or for example, I will say there have been Alphonso Davies, and the feeling among the Real Madrid fan base probably is the successful path, the success of Real Madrid during the transfer sagas has proved wrong lately. And I think what it means, this future signing, if it gets done, I think it will mean that Real Madrid gets back to the successful path, their way of doing things that has proved successful, for example, with Antonio Rudiger, David Alaba, or now Kylian Mbappe. Yeah,
that's an interesting what you said, James, in terms of the peak of his career. I wonder if, there's a bit of a sore point here that Liverpool are losing a player in the peak of his career, because if you look at what they're trying to build as well moving forward, this is a player that could also be influential in making that happen.
Yeah. I think there's no sugarcoating the size of the loss to Liverpool. I mean, you only had to sit and watch the Carabao Cup final recently, and I know there was a lot more wrong than just the absence of Trent that day, but Liverpool were desperately lacking a creativity and someone to open up a defence in a way that few players can like him. And I think, at times, the wider narrative around Trent has been feels like it's so obsessed with picking holes in what he can't do, rather than acknowledging the extraordinary skill set that he's got. So yeah, I think the only thing with that kind of maybe negates it slightly is I think we've seen Liverpool's style evolve under Arne Slot. I think certainly under Klopp, the Liverpool was so reliant on the fullbacks to create, whilst now the midfield 3 are more involved. We've seen Trent almost revert back to a more traditional kind of role this season as right back. He hasn't been marauding forward and given the same kind of freedom as we've seen previously. But yeah, he's 26. I think if he had 2-3 years left on his contract, we'd be talking about £100 million asset. So yeah, you can't dismiss that's why people are so upset. It's not just the fact that he's a local lad. It's because he's also incredibly gifted.
Guillermo, just a quick one on the way Real Madrid are doing business. You talk about David Alaba, you took a look at Antonio Rudiger, you look at Kylian Mbappe's deals, all three. Really interesting business, but also strategically, the club might deny this, but the way they use the media to build up these kind of transfers, you know, we're already hearing about Trent 2 years before it even happens. I remember the Mbappe one, that's been going on for goodness knows how long, even while he was at PSG. They know how to move those levers quite well to get what they want.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel that is crazy. I remember a piece from Dermot Corrigan about the Spanish outlets covers on the Real Madrid targets. It's like the usual practice or the usual way of doing things for Real. They usually leak their targets, but at the same time they act with a lot of secrecy, like privacy. There is a lot of secretism. It's an hermetic club, so they have been working for almost 2 years on this signing, and nobody really knows how advanced it was a few months ago. And what is clear is that is a contrasted way of doing things. They have done it a lot of times already, or they have done it a lot of times already, like for example with Jude Bellingham. I think that they use their current players, like for example in this case Jude Bellingham, to convince and to act as ambassadors for the next signings. And I think it's a really interesting way of doing things, and it has been proved successful, as I already said.
Yeah, I got to say, Trent and Jude are really good friends. So yeah, I can see what you mean.
Yeah.
Has Jude been Agent Jude, as they say? But Phil, let's just put ourselves in the shoes of the player himself, Phil. Real Madrid, you know, you've had a good career. Real Madrid come calling. Neither of us will know what that feels like. But I mean, this is a very hard offer to refuse.
It is, and also an easier offer for Real Madrid to make than most other clubs in Europe. I mean, they're clever with this in the way they were with Mbappe. They talk about what goes on in the media there made me think of Rodri as well. That was one that appeared out of the blue before he did his ACL as a future target for Real Madrid. And they seem to be very good at setting the hairs running, knowing that the stories will stick and it will become part of the narrative. And it's not that necessarily forces transfers, but it does make them quite difficult to resist once players or clubs feel like they're trying to be seduced. And I mean, from the point of view of Trent Alexander-Arnold, it is a big move. It is a mega move for him. He knows what he's going to there. He knows what the squad is like. He knows what the attention will be like at Real Madrid. And I think it says a lot about Real that you can convince players like Mbappe and Alexander-Arnold to have the courage to stick it out and take a free transfer, knowing fine well that it'll be very unpopular at the club that they're leaving. They have that clout and they have that pull, and that's why they can do it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that also from the coaching staff point of view, I think it's worth saying that they don't only see Alexander-Arnold as a normal defender. They don't see him like a normal right back. We shouldn't consider this signing as, okay, they are signing Dani Carvajal's replacement. That's why it's also important, because at Real Madrid, after Toni Kroos' departure, I think there have been obviously the feeling that something is needed in the midfield, in the building up. And with this player, Carlo Ancelotti's staff consider that Real Madrid will improve their building up, and also in set pieces. It's all focused on the offensive side, because they know that in terms of defensive skills, maybe he lacks. Alexander-Arnold lacks some, I would say, some skills, but still he could be a really powerful asset in offensive terms. Yeah,
very good. And I guess that's also why Liverpool are reluctant or sad to let him go, because he offers so much to the team. Anyway, Guillermo, I know you've got to leave us, but thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your insight on this.
Always a pleasure. Bye.
While Trent Alexander-Arnold's future appears to be away from Liverpool, we need to talk about the contracts of both Virgil van Dijk and Mo Salah. James, what impact do you think this will have on those contract negotiations? Because, Simon Hughes on a previous podcast we did basically thought that this could be a situation where Liverpool lose 3 of their best players potentially.
I personally, I don't think it'll come to that. In terms of the impact, I'm not sure that there really is one, because I think throughout these kind of sagas, the Trent one has always stood out as very different to the other two for numerous reasons, not least the fact that we knew that Real Madrid's pursuit was always there with Trent, and the fact his age, I think it was, the dynamic was always different there with. With Van Dijk and Salah, obviously they're in the twilight years of their career. It's been complicated because we know that from a business standpoint, there's a reluctance to dish out massive salaries and long-term contracts to players who, obviously Salah will be turning 33 this summer, Van Dijk will be 34. So those discussions have dragged on. Yeah, if you'd said to me in August, we'd be sat here nearly April still discussing it, I'd have said, nah, no chance. Surely we'll have clarity by then. But no, I still feel that there's a confidence that those two players will end up staying put. I think we've probably reached a point where, they are, there's obviously offers on the table for both of them, and they're having to weigh up what else is out there, what their other options are before making a definitive decision.
Yeah, Phil, does this make this tricky for that Van Dijk and Salah negotiations?
It's a great question. I guess one thing that it does do is plant the seed in their minds that when this season ends, and I'm assuming here that Alexander-Arnold is going, Liverpool will be instantly weaker, albeit with the summer transfer window ahead of them. The first thing that happens is Alexander-Arnold goes out the door. So that may influence them. But there is another angle to this, which is what are the alternative offers or the interest that Van Dijk and Salah actually have?
Good question.
As it stands, it's Real Madrid for Alexander-Arnold, and that's essentially the biggest move out there. It's a gimme really, and as a free agent, it kind of makes a lot of sense for him. With Van Dijk and Salah, it's not to say that when push comes to shove, Liverpool won't end up representing the best option. I can see that happening. Salah, I'm unconvinced about. I've got to say, I feel like it could still be him exiting after Alexander-Arnold. Van Dijk, not so sure. I think like James, I could see a situation in which he does stay. But to go back to something I said last time we podded on Liverpool, I think a week or so ago, if they do all leave, that's potentially 3 huge holes to fill, irrespective of what the club intend to do in the summer. And if I was Slot, I'd be quite concerned about that, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. James, let's throw ahead to the summer. Let's potentially see if there are replacements for Trent Alexander-Arnold. We've been saying, potentially that this has been in the works for a while, and technically Liverpool won't be surprised that he's leaving. What kind of names have been thrown about? I've seen Frimpong being thrown about, but I mean, it's all speculation at this point.
Yeah, I think Frimpong is an interesting one because certainly he's exciting, isn't he, as an attacking force. You'd say certainly more of a wing back than a full back. So it's just how the dynamic, how Slot and Richard Hughes see that potentially working out. It's going to be fascinating to see what direction they go in. I think Conor Bradley, again, is such a talented young footballer that they've got incredibly high hopes for, yet the concern with him is he has now had a fair few muscle injuries, which of course happens quite a lot to young players when their bodies are still growing and adapting to the intensity of top level football. But it's a big leap to kind of to think to yourself, right, well, Conor Bradley is now ready to become the starting right back, playing every 3 or 4 days at a really high level as Trent has done for so long. So I think Liverpool are going to have to invest substantially in another right back to come in and compete with him. Of course, they do have other options in terms of Gomez and Kwanzaa that's played there, but they're not. They're centre backs who are versatile. I think you can't there's no way that Liverpool could not replace him. But of course, the outlay for that will have to be balanced against what else they need to do this summer, because it's going to be a busy one. You look at the left back situation. That's an area that needs reinforcing. Even if Van Dijk stays and signs his contract, there's a strong argument they need another centre half. The centre forward with whether if it's not Isak because maybe the price tag is too high, then who else do they go for? And potentially reinvest the funds from selling Darwin Núñez. You look at someone like Ryan Gravenberch, who has clearly felt the effects, I'd say, over the last month of being played week in, week out. And you need probably greater backup for him. So there's a lot on the agenda. It's not as if you just replace Trent if Van Dijk and Salah both stay, and of course if Van Dijk or Salah or worst case scenario both go, then what a challenge that is. You're effectively trying to replace the irreplaceable.
Phil, I'm just thinking how fickle football potentially can be, because look, I mean, respect to Arne Slot, you've got a team now in his first year of being with them who are 12 points at the top of the Premier League, looking to win the Premier League, almost in pole position to win the Premier League. Things are forgotten quite easily when you're lifting up the Premier League trophy. As a Liverpool fan, does that quieten some of the noise?
Oh, it does. I don't think there'll be much noise around Slot himself. I mean, he's handled the transition from Klopp to his era brilliantly. I mean, there hasn't really been any sense this season of the Klopp legacy on his shoulders or breathing down his neck. And if he has felt that at any point, it's not been obvious to us on the outside. But at the same time, he did inherit a good short-term hand from Klopp. There's no doubt about that. It doesn't mean that Liverpool should have won the title this season, and I think he's gone beyond what any of us anticipated. But they have the strength to be competitive, no doubt about that. What I think we're seeing now is, I guess you could say, the downside of the inheritance from Klopp. 3 massive names who might be about to say adios and who will take an awful lot of replacing. And it's, again, to repeat myself from a week ago, it's that weird scenario where you might find that year 2 for Slot is going to be harder than year 1, which is unfortunate because the title is something to be built on, something that should be built on. But in the midst of this, I don't think, when it comes to the squad building or what happens in the summer, I don't think if there are fingers to be pointed, any of them are going to be pointed at Slot, because he is basically blameless in the way this is all shaped up.
Yeah, and I guess if Liverpool do win the Premier League, which is looking incredibly likely, James, he will have a lot more say in building a new squad in his own image, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think, picking up on what Phil said, I think it's probably suited Arne Slot the fact that he is a bit detached from that process with the contract renewals, because it's just meant that it's just created a lot less noise and less of a distraction over the course of this season, because he's just been able to bat them away by saying that's not my remit. I'm a head coach. I'm focused on coming up with game plans and training the players on a daily basis. So he would obviously have an input in recruitment, and all those discussions will be going on. I don't, contingency plans will have been drawn up already for all eventualities. In the same way as I think it's been pretty clear for a while how the Trent saga was likely to end. That it's not like they've been suddenly kind of caught out by the news. And the same with Van Dijk and Salah. They will have contingency plans drawn up if, and it's a big if at the minute, they have to go and replace them. But, it's you always want to reinforce from a position of strength, don't you? And, you can't get much stronger than Premier League champions. And I think the biggest thing for Liverpool now is to ensure, having been so good for so long this season, you don't want to limp over the line. 9 games to go, 12 points clear. You want to do it in style. And it would be a real shame if the kind of the uncertainty around players and potential exits of Trent and whoever else kind of overshadow what is shaping up to be an incredible bit of glory that Slot has masterminded in his first season.
Just quickly though, one of the critical things this summer surely has to be how much Liverpool can pull in from the players who they want to go. You mentioned Diaz, Darwin Núñez, obviously Kelleher, I would assume, is just about at the end of his tether when it comes to not being first choice. there is, for all that, that Nunes in particular seems to be regarded as a bit of a liability, there is the potential of pulling quite a bit of money from those three.
100%, yeah. I mean, there was obviously some contact from Saudi in January regarding Darwin Nunes, and I think if that kind of comes up again in the summer, then that could well prove really, really helpful for Liverpool in terms of the rebuilding that needs to go on, because there was talk of 60 to 70 million. Now, I think it goes without saying, a European club isn't going to pay that kind of fee for Darwin Nunes. And you're right, Diaz, there's a lot of noise around Diaz last summer, Barcelona, interest from Saudi as well. I think with Diaz, at 28, he's actually had a decent season, Diaz, but you're probably at that point, 2 years left on his deal, you have to make a decision. Do you renew his contract, or do you offload him this summer? And of course, they've got Gakpo, who has done really well wide left when called upon. And you're right, I think just Kelleher only 1 year left. He's wanted to leave the last couple of summers, but there isn't a better second choice goalkeeper around than him. Liverpool should be banking 20 to 30 million for him, I think, no problem this summer.
Yeah, for sure. All right, gents, let's leave it there. Phil, James, also David and Guillermo from earlier, thanks for joining us on the pod, and also thank you guys for being with us as well. Make sure to like the video and also subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to leave us a comment. We'll see you soon. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.